Hello friends, this is Odds, and if you know someone working at Behavior, please send them an email, check on them, see if they're doing okay. They have had a very busy week lately. On top of releasing a new chapter with new content, they also bundled in that PTB testing branch a completely overhaul system to how tunneling and camping works in this game. Massive implications. We already made a video discussing why it is so concerning. And the long story short is that a huge part of this community was in an uproar. They thought that this could even kill the game and be really restrictive. We even had a developer of the game, a former developer, say that they don't agree with this change. So to say that it was controversial would be an understatement. The developers have noticed this sentiment and they seem to have admitted some fault. They have basically postponed this whole update to a later time and admitted their mistake in doing this. So we'll deal with this later and we'll see whether or not this is a mistake in the first place. But while distracted by all of this and all of these big changes, there are other mistakes that Behavior is making that are not so much on the spotlight. I have listed what I think are some of the most concerning issues, concerning decisions that could influence this game's future that have already been made and are not really being reevaluated or are currently being made. I've made a top 10. Let's talk about them. Mistake number one, and this one honestly bothers me quite a bit because there are so many other complaints bundled into one. That's why I'm talking about it first. Behavior is basically enabling pay-to-win skins by ignoring the gameplay effects of their cosmetics. I think we can all agree that lately the cosmetics teams has been doing an amazing job. The art team of this game is unmatched. They make the most beautiful, gorgeous skins time after time, update after update. Every new riff, we have amazing skins, and they're doing a better job making sure that every character gets at least a few of them every now and then. That's wonderful. That's really, really wonderful. Let's check out, for example, the Plague, one of my favorite killers, right? Look at some of the skins she's gotten lately. This is really, really cool. And yet, you're never going to see me running this one right here. This one looks really cool, and it has a cosmetic recolor as well. And you know why I'm not going to run this skin ever? Listen to this. You hear that little ringing? You're going to be hearing that the entire match when you play with the skin. There's another Trapper skin that also has the same issue. I have no idea that this is a thing until I buy the skin or I unlock it and I try it in game, and it is so unbelievably jarring. It is so bothersome. I cannot stand it, and I don't know a single person that likes hearing that the entire time they're playing the game. The fact that we don't have an option to disable this or we're not warned is honestly terrible. And sometimes, honestly, you just don't know what you're getting until you purchase it. We all know the issue that sometimes you buy a weapon that looks really cool in the store, and then when you go in game, it takes up half your screen and you realize it gives you a disadvantage. But sometimes you don't even get to see the weapon that you're buying. One of these killers that does that for you is the Spirit. You might notice that the Spirit on her normal skins has a sword that only appears during certain animations. You don't really get to see it very well unless the Spirit is in a certain animation. Otherwise, the sword is hidden in a different form in her wrist, right? So it's a little silly that we don't have a toggle to kill the animation of the character so that we can see them okay, or some kind of preview. But at least some killers are not very noisy during their animations. The Spirit is a little bit noisy, and you could buy a special skin that makes her a little bit quiet on the menu. But there are worse offenders. For example, and I think this is the worst, Ghoul. Ghoul plays this sound every single time you open him in the lobby. And he will also occasionally scream during his lobby animations. If you want to skip this, there are two ways to do it. Number one, pay money. Just buy the Riza skin, which is worth quite a bit because it's a legendary skin. And she is very, very quiet. Maybe she speaks a little bit in the lobby, but that's a lot easier on the ears. You're not going to go deaf by age 40. And another way to completely kill the animation is by going into the charm segment. This will spawn a little hook, and now you don't have to see it. Now, one thing that you might find interesting about the UI of the cosmetics in general is that it's so weird. We have a sliding bar on the left side of it, which I've always found really, really strange, and it's really difficult to navigate. Now, luckily for you, there is a search function, but if you want to see this search function, you need to actually click on this twice, and then the search is revealed. Otherwise, you have to click on it so that you can go on each individual slot to put these things. Now, if for example, if I want to put my Fog Whisper charm, I can type this, right? Let's say I put this. Yeah, perfect. And now what happens if I want to do this for each killer? Well, I have to, there's no option to apply or remove from all the killers. I have to go and do this individually for all 40 killers if I want to put something or remove it. Honestly, this is such an outdated UI. It's such an outdated experience. It's not even that old and I already hate it. Please give us something better behavior. But the problems do not end just with the UI. Once the gameplay begins, this is where the real problems begin. There are killers out there that have literal pay-to-win skins. If you play as Glitchtrap, which is a expensive legendary skin for the animatronic, you will notice that his footsteps are way quieter with this skin. If you don't have this skin, the default skin's movement has a lot of clanky sounds playing, and it makes any form of undetectable or stealth much harder. I think this is a real problem, and it's something that they vowed to change on Survivor, at least some time ago. Some time ago, the developer said, we are going to make an effort to make the audio levels of survivors a little bit more equalized so that there's not some survivors that are very loud, really easy to track, and some survivors that are really quiet, really difficult to listen to, which gives a certain advantage when you play those survivors. Not only have they apparently given up on this, they did give an update that said, oh, it's a little bit more complex. Not only have they not fixed it, they keep making it worse. The latest survivor that has come out in the PTB, she seems extremely quiet. And every now and then, if we go to the store, we see that they keep releasing skins that are genuinely really good for stealth. And these are not free skins. These are skins that are licensed that you have to buy. And look at this. This is an amazing skin. It completely obstructs her hair. It kind of breaks her silhouette a little bit, and is a certain color that blends in quite well in a lot of dark maps. It's true that DBD is not a super dark, foggy game like it used to be many years ago, but it's still definitely a game where small advantages like this matter, and putting them behind a paywall just doesn't seem ethical. I think it's a problem, and it's one that they seemingly have given up on, which is one of the most concerning things. Mistake number 2, and this is one that behavior has been making very slowly over time, is ignoring the power description bloat. It is no surprise that if we go back to some of the first killers released in the history of Dead by Daylight, their powers were very simple to understand. How to play as and how to play against was very easy back in the day. But nowadays, slowly over time, the killer has just slowly been getting more and more complex on average on every single release. It is really unflattering to compare the powers this way, and I understand it's not fair. So instead of hunters, let's just go for a killer that has been reworked a few more times, that's a little bit more complex, such as Trapper. And then you see that the descriptions are not that far from each other. There's not that much difference. There's not that much longer or shorter, right? But then I realized maybe it is because the newer power killers have a lot more to say and they specify and are more descriptive. Maybe that's why. So maybe it's not really a problem. So I did a little experiment, right? I went on the Trapper's power and I edited in all of the important facts that I think every player should know that are not spelled out in the power. Things that the game should tell you, but it doesn't really tell you unless it's in some obscure loading tip, right? And as you can see, the description did get a little bit longer, but not by much. Now let's go to the Crashwell's power, the one that you're seeing on the right here. This already explains so much and there's so much to read. So maybe there's not much else that is left unsaid, right? Wrong. There's so much to explain. This killer in particular has so many unexplained mechanics that you would only figure out after playing a few times, or after reading add-ons, or after reading tooltips, or even just, you might never figure it out until you see someone else. I think this is a problem. This is exposing a glaring issue in Dead by Daylight right now. The information that can be presented in one tiny screen like this is just not enough to understand a killer. We definitely need a new screen designed from the ground up that has different little GIFs or animated pictures or something to please explain the power properly, instead of expecting every player to either pick up an encyclopedia or watch a 30-minute video explaining everything. This is really inappropriate, and something that is only going to become harder and harder the more killers that are in the backlog. For a new player to even begin to understand what each killer does with this level of lackluster information is going to be nothing short of impossible without watching videos, guides, and etc. It's something that benefits me as a content creator, but something that definitely holds this game back. Mistake number 3, and this one's been going on for many, many years now. It is neglecting environment hitboxes. This is one that affects both sides, but it's a little bit easier to see it on killers. So let's imagine that you're playing the hillbilly and you know that you're supposed to use your chainsaw for mobility, but then as a beginner, you notice that if you use your chainsaw from certain places, you actually bump into invisible obstacles.
Tell me right now what I just bumped on. What did I just bump on? Did you see it coming? Be real.
Yeah.
You saw that coming?
Yeah.
What did I just bump on?
There's an invisible box there to stop Skybilly and a few other killers, but it bumps Bubba.
It seems almost like from some elevations, you cannot really use your chainsaw without bumping into an invisible wall that's there to block you. And you might be led to believe that all platforms have this property, but that's simply not true. In a lot of maps, many killers can propel themselves using their power, and it's actually a really good idea to do so because it can allow you to cover distances quickly and catch up to survivors in chase. So doing this is a really good idea. But if you try it on certain other maps, then you'll notice that it's completely impossible. And it's not something that you can visually tell. It's something that you need experience. You need to know how the hitboxes are actually coded without seeing them. So it's something you can only do with a lot of practice. And sometimes these hitboxes change between updates without anything in the patch notes really reflecting it, which adds another layer of complexity to all of this. The worst part about all of this is that as an experienced player, you will know where the hitboxes are and you will try to kind of sometimes manipulate your camera to play around them, right? And it affects so many characters, so many maps. On Survivor, it's a bit more complicated. On Survivor, you will have things such as getting stuck on small little obstacles without understanding why. Sometimes these things are fixed, like the one you're seeing on screen, this one got fixed. Sometimes they go unfixed for a long time. On some killers, it becomes a pretty frustrating issue. For example, on Deathslinger, you are supposed to use your power to shoot through small gaps, and that's one of the most important parts of his kit. And as you can see, you can shoot through these handrails pretty consistently, even from slightly angle shots. You're pretty able to do this. Even in elevation, you can still do it. It works pretty well. But if you try the exact same thing in a different map that looks pretty much the same, you notice that it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's no consistency between maps. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the same map changes from one update to another. Shots that were possible now become impossible. It seems to me a pretty high priority effort should be dedicated to making the maps actually have high fidelity. What looks like a hole should be a hole. What looks blocked or it's a glass or something like that, then it shouldn't go through. That way, we will have an easier time when we have more projectile killers, like the one that's coming out, and new players can actually learn them without having to expend, like, say, 6 months testing in private matches what can be shot through and what cannot. This, I feel, if they started taking this seriously, I feel could actually save them quite a lot of headaches in the future. Mistake number 4 is the mishandling and mismanagement of status effects. Some status effects in Dead by Daylight only show up situationally, and they are mostly okay. Some of them are just not very well designed, such as blindness. This one removes your ability to see auras, that includes your teammates. And this obviously hurts solo players more. If you're in a SWIF, if you're playing with friends and you're communicating with them, not seeing their auras makes very little difference. So having a status effect that just punishes you for not being in comms seems a little bit outdated, and definitely something it should be looked at, but I understand it's not a very high priority for the team right now. But there are other changes that are pretty recent that were definitely in the wrong direction. Let's take Mangled, for example. Mangle, which typically comes associated with also the status effect of hemorrhage, makes your healing a little bit slower, and if you're interrupted, it starts going away really rapidly. Now, there was a problem with Mangled because the developers were nerfing self-care and medkits and other self-healing speed, so they did not want Mangled to be really strong. We also had new anti-healing perks, such as leverage, cobraphobia, and we did not want to have a heal that was so slow that it could really be problematic. So the developers needed to nerf Mangled, but instead of tweaking the numbers, they actually put it on a timer. And this timer now depends on whichever perk or add-on it is applying it. Sometimes it can be a long time, sometimes it can be a shorter time. And this, in my opinion, was a terrible mistake. With the other changes coming to Dead by Daylight, encouraging survivors to just stay on the hook for a long time, it is now entirely possible to apply Mangled, hook a survivor, and by the time they are unhooked, they already have completely shrugged off the effect. It also encourages survivors to run perks that are already very, very, very strong and punishes them if they don't bring such strong healing perks. I think the way Mangle was done was very, very misguided, and it actually really pushed the game in an unhealthier, more meta direction, meta requiring direction for survivors. But the one status effect that really, really was handled poorly, and the main point of my complaint here, is haste. Haste is the ability of either killer or survivors to be a little bit faster. This can sometimes be quite ridiculous, especially if you stack it. You can have really stupid situations where a killer moves comically fast, or a survivor moves so much faster than the killer, especially considering the smaller hitboxes, that you can literally run around in places and never get caught. And the developers rightfully came to the conclusion that haste should not stack. If you have a haste of 10% and a haste of 5%, maybe only the 10%, the highest one, should stay, and they shouldn't stack together. They actually tested that for a while, and oh my god, it was a good idea. Now you can make every add-on, every perk, every single thing that applies haste, you could make it be good on its own instead of having to imagine each of them possibly compounded together. And this was amazing. And then they walk back on it. I cannot explain why. This is such a bad decision. Right now, we are back to a meta where a killer can stack a lot of different haste speed perks, which don't feel good as Survivor. And if Survivor does the same, and you have to chase someone that's moving faster than you, it feels so bad as a killer as well. They could have generally made a simpler system. They literally did it, and then they walk back on it for no apparent reason. I am really baffled that they did this, and I fear for what's coming. Mistake number 5 is ignoring the issues with skill checks. Skill checks are the funny little QTE that shows up typically when you're doing generators or healing. For players that have quite a few hours, these are very trivial and very boring. Even the special skill checks that you get from some perks are, generally speaking, very easy. And it's a little bit hard to balance them because honestly, this is something that affects mostly newer players that struggle with the paying attention part and hitting them on time. And also people that play at lower FPS have an innate disadvantage. If you play on higher FPS, you'll notice just how much easier it becomes to hit normal and great skill checks. It is true that there are some killers that can make skill checks really nasty and really difficult. And honestly, trying to make a balance that accommodates for all of these different scenarios, that makes skill checks fair in all these different scenarios, is very difficult. And the developers they don't really seem to try. They release new perks that honestly are so situational and so bad, so unbelievably bad, that only new players could think of using them. But new players are not going to be using these perks because they are DLC perks. So basically these perks go unused and untouched, and I think that's a bit of an issue. But maybe the greater issue is what happens when you miss a skill check or you hit a great skill check. When you miss a skill check, you're going to lose progress on your generator or your heal. You're going to make a loud noise notification. And there's also a buffer that prevents you from getting back on the action for 2-3 seconds-ish. It feels like a really long time. This feels awful and is very punishing. The missing skill check penalty could be reduced across the board. That would probably help new players, and that would probably make statistics a bit more reliable. You wouldn't have people losing the game because they missed 2 skill checks. Right now, that can certainly happen. And the worst part is that it can happen for things outside of your control. If you're healing someone on the ground and they are 80 or 90% healed, and they accidentally on that exact moment, maybe due to latency, hold the run button or move for a second, you could miss a skill check, and that is going to prevent you from healing them for such a long time after. It really feels that this system could be changed, and it's barely been changed in the last few years. Now, what happens if you hit a great skill check during repairs or healing? This actually is a very broken part of Dead by Daylight. When you hit a great skill check while healing, you get 3% extra progress. If you hit it while on a gen, you get 1% extra progress immediately. And balancing this is very difficult. By itself, it's not a huge deal on either side, but with items that give you extra skill checks on heals and extra progress, and items that give you extra skill checks on repairs, you can have really nasty repair speed and really quick healing speed if you get lucky enough, and if you're good enough at hitting skill checks. It's also virtually impossible to detect if someone is cheating. You could make a program. I've had some of my viewers that are self-taught coders create a program that identifies what's in your screen, and when it sees a skill check, it automatically hits it for you. And this does not mess with the game. It is completely undetectable. You could hit every single skill check with good FPS, good skill, or a program. Needless to say, if you're an actual cheater that does have a program that affects the coding of the game, you can also make all of your skill checks automatically be hit, right? And this is an issue, obviously. How can you balance a game when healing speed and gens are so different? It really makes it harder for you to find cheaters. Not too long ago, I played a game where I was playing Survivor, and only after rewatching the game, I noticed that one of my teammates was cheating. And every single time they did a skill check, their gen was like boop, 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 going up and up and up because of perks like hyper focus. The developers keep releasing skill check related perks without addressing the larger concern. In my opinion, what they should be doing is make skill checks on healing a bit more consistent, remove add-ons that affect skill checks. Toolboxes could make generators faster, but could actually reduce the amount of skill checks that you get. And they could actually normalize the amount of skill checks that you get. Many perks like Autodidact that get better on skill checks, they sometimes are feast or famine. Either you get them all at once or you get 0 skill checks on an entire heal. And this part of DBD right now feels really, really outdated, should probably be looked at. Mistake number 6, and this is one that personally really, really bothers me anytime I notice it: balancing killer add-ons on Excel spreadsheet data. This is something that developers absolutely do, and it's not a mistake per se to look at data to inform your balancing decisions. The developers know so much about the game just based on numbers. They know how often a perk or an add-on is used, at which MMR it is more popular, how often this perk wins when it's used in a match, and all of this is wonderful and it should help here and there. But it leads to very glaring issues in some of the decisions that they make. Let me give you an example, right? Let's say that we put some data about add-ons and we make a graphic out of them and we have these results for Nurse, Trickster, and Demogorgon. We immediately see a really glaring issue here. We see that 2 add-ons on Nurse, 2 add-ons on Trickster, and 2 add-ons on Demogorgon are at the top. They are picked the most and they have the highest win rate, and everything else is just like so far behind them. So it would be very natural for you to nerf these add-ons and tweak them. This is something that Behavior does constantly. They take an add-on that is 20%, that is overrepresented, and they nerf it to 10%. They take an add-on that is 10%, and they nerf it to 5%. This is something they did with Dracula recently. But the problem is, nerfing add-ons in these scenarios is not always the right call. Now, for Nurse, this makes perfect sense. Her 2 top add-ons in this made-up scenario are the add-ons that give her Mangled, which is really useful in Nurse and really difficult to apply with other perks, right? And the one that extends her launch, which is obviously an incredibly useful ability and is much, much better than her other add-ons, right? So nerfing these 2 add-ons on Nurse, it could make sense, or even reworking them, that could make sense, and it could be the right call, because her other add-ons are pretty strong, and if these add-ons are a bit weaker, that might balance things out a little bit. Now, if we move on to Trickster, okay, it is true that some of these add-ons at the top are a little bit strong, but the problem, it's not that these add-ons are necessarily very strong, it's that the rest of add-ons on this killer are so bad, so unbelievably bad, that knowledgeable players will never, ever use them, resulting in really low usage rate and low MMR, and by elimination, really high usage rates of the 2 or 3 add-ons that actually are good or actually are usable. Demogorgon, by the way, is an example of a killer that has multiple powers. He has a teleport, he has detection, a little bit of stealth, and he also has a shred. But for some reason, many killers like this have 20 add-ons and 17 of them are dedicated to the things that people don't care about. So many of Demogorgon's add-ons are dedicated to his teleport, which is not very, very usable in chase, to his stealth, which is not a big part of his kit, and to his detection, which many people just completely ignore. Meanwhile, there's only 2 or 3 add-ons that actually make his shred, the main power that he has, better. So obviously those add-ons get used and overused much, much more than the rest. Now, the problem here is not those add-ons needing to be nerfed, it's the design of the killer and the design of the add-ons themselves. This should call for a complete redesign, maybe make some add-ons basic, blah, 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 and not just a strategic nerf to those add-ons. You nerf those add-ons, you make the demo players upset, you make the killer that's not already very strong worse, and you achieve absolutely nothing doing so. As I said, this is something that Behavior has done as recently as Dracula. nerfing add-ons that are not necessarily very, very strong into ridiculously small numbers just because the other add-ons are so meh that nobody uses them at high levels. And it's something that they've historically done to other killers, such as, for example, Hillbilly. Hillbilly needed add-ons so much to work that the 2 engravings were overrepresented, and they nerfed the engravings. Why? Because they thought that they were OP. They weren't OP, they were just used because everything else was really, really terrible. Unfortunately, we still see some examples of this, but it's hopefully a mistake that they will stop making altogether. The developers have a group of players named consultants. They are people with a lot of hours in DBD that are paid for their job, and they can be consulted on specific changes. If the developers consulted these people a bit more frequently when doing these strategic tweaks, I think they could actually avoid some of these issues and make more meaningful changes to add-ons. But unfortunately, when every add-on is bad and there's 2 add-ons that are not bad, then those 2 add-ons look OP, and the developers sometimes just nerf them immediately. Mistake number 7 is actually a little bit different from the other ones. This is not something that Behavior is doing, it's something that they're not doing. It is not downsizing the amount of add-ons and perks with every chapter. Roughly speaking, every chapter comes with a killer, 3 perks, a survivor, sometimes 2 survivors, that's 3 or 6 perks on top, and also 20 new add-ons for the killer. This is an unsustainable amount of new content to make. It is very difficult to design so many new perks without having perks that are basically copies of each other's, perks that are completely useless and nobody's ever going to use, or perks that are completely game breaking and they break the game and we have to now rework them and they cause a lot of friction. Maybe releasing 1 or 2 perks per chapter and lowering the cost of each chapter could be a good idea in the future. You could even go back retroactively and merge some of the existing perks to be a bit more useful. Maybe remove a perk from every chapter or anything like that. It doesn't seem like a lot, but that would go a long way in making this game feel less bloated for beginners. And long term, we would have a little bit more time before this game has 500 perks. And it's honestly a balancing and bug nightmare to sort through them. One thing that, in my opinion, could be very, very doable is reducing the amount of add-ons from 20, which is the current amount of them, to 15. Now, there's a really easy way to do this, okay? Many killers that aim have a brown add-on that allows you to see where you're going to land. This is in like a scary amount of killers. Maybe it's just enabling like a little aiming spot or a little crosshair. This should not be an add-on. All of these add-ons should be removed. And instead, you should have a toggle option in the menu for the killer, where if you toggle it, you see the aim reticule, and if you toggle it off, then you don't see it. So that's already 1 add-on less, right? Then you could also have some of the add-ons that do very similar things just merge into a single one. I don't know a single killer in this game that needs 20 add-ons. So many of them could go down an add-on or 2 extra if they just merge some of the weakest ones. Maybe take 2 brown add-ons and put them together. Take 2 yellow add-ons that are not very strong, put them together, right? And if there's any add-on that is very outdated and it's not very good, you just take it out, or maybe make it into the base kit. If the killer feels really good with this add-on, you just make that add-on default and then you remove it. Doing these small steps would probably allow you to reduce maybe 3, 4, or 5 add-ons on each killer, and that would make it a little bit easier to maybe come up with new exciting add-ons for upcoming killers as well. It would reduce the workload. I think the game wouldn't be any worse. In fact, it might actually be better, and it would make their job a little bit simpler. For the future of DBD, I do think this would be really, really, really good. Right now, I think we are at 800 add-ons, and we'll probably be at 1,000 in just a matter of years. So yeah, please, Behavior, this one actually is for your own good. Make this easier on yourself. Talking about making things easier for yourself, mistake number 8, creating perks and add-ons with ripple effects. In other words, Behavior keeps making certain new elements, mostly perks, but sometimes also add-ons, with ripple effects that affect other stuff. We have perks that only work if you bring another perk from the other side and could be completely useless without them. We have perks that do nothing on their own, absolutely nothing on their own, and need to be paired with other perks. I don't hate these ones, but they are still a little bit harder to balance. And then we have perks that affect perks on the same side or even the opposite side. And this is where it really, really gets difficult. Now, because we have a perk like Lethal Pursuer, making every other auto read longer, you need to balance every single perk with this in mind. If you have a new perk or a new add-on and the perfect auto read would be 4 seconds, well, now it's going to be 6. So maybe you need to make it 3 or even 2. This is a problem. The developers keep making perks that affect other perks in the current version of the game, but also in the future. And this is something that just makes balancing so complicated. Do you guys remember when Nicolas Cage came out and he had the innovative ability to down himself? This was something that, for the most part, survivors could never, ever do by themselves. There were maybe some situations where you could bleed out to mending, but that was really, really rare. You could never go down controlled environment by yourself until this perk came out. This perk called Bloat, right? And when this perk came out, suddenly there were so many abusable scenarios. Killers could find themselves losing their power. They could find themselves where, for example, the box from Pinhead, you could automatically solve it by downing yourself. Like, there were a lot of things that this one tiny perk affected that created a massive ripple effect, and the developers had to go and fix everything up just for one perk. Now, I'm not saying that this perk isn't fun. I actually quite like it, right? It's fun to have perks like that, but the developers at this point, they are struggling with so many bugs, with so many balancing issues, that I think reworking old perks and creating new perks to have this sort of effect is a nightmare. For example, Visual is a perk that's very hotly debated right now. It recently has been slightly nerfed in the PTB, and it no longer stacks with itself, thank God. But this is a perk that affects so much. It works on killers' powers, it works on killers' perks, and when you have Visual, a perk that would otherwise be pretty balanced, like Make Your Choice, becomes completely useless. A perk that would be normally balanced, such as Hubris, completely useless. Now you have to buff these perks that were already kind of fine, maybe, to take into account that Visual could make them worse. Not to mention that as a killer, it feels awful to maybe hit a survivor with a bottle and not know how much they're going to be slowed down because you don't know their perks. If they have Visual, or if there was a teammate near them a few seconds ago with Visual, their effects is going to be shorter, and you have no idea how it's going to be until maybe you see it happen right in front of your face. So they really should cut back on these perks that affect other perks, unless they are in an incredibly controlled environment and they really know, unless it's just a few targeting things that are really accurate and limited. They really should not make perks that affect absolutely everything else in the game. So far, the record with this type of perk is not good, and again, it's just making their job a lot harder. Mistake number 9, not nerfing the nurse already. The nurse is a bit of a problematic killer. She often shows up at the top of every tier list for being an S tier, very strong killer. The developers cut her some slack because statistically she often doesn't perform so well. In fact, because she is difficult to play and needs to be played in a very specific way, it's pretty common to see her at the bottom of the kill rate list because she doesn't do super well in the hands of beginners. So on average, she doesn't really kill a lot, and the devs cut her some slack because of that. However, it is no real secret that this killer is single-handedly bottlenecking a lot of the design choices in Dead by Daylight. Every time you make a map, you need to make sure that you put enough walls to make sure that survivors can run everywhere. If there is line of sight, a lot of killers get really strong, but Nurse in particular gets completely unstoppable. Having to change maps around her is not such a big deal, but the real big problem, in my opinion, are aura perks. Luckily, the Nurse used to be able to insta-down survivors, but cannot do it anymore. The Nurse used to be able to apply basic attack perks, such as Know It, and every insta-down perk was incredibly strong on Nurse, and the developers rightfully removed her ability to use basic attacks. Now, when you attack with your teleport, it's a special attack, doesn't insta-down. That's good. But we're still left with the whole auto-reading problem. Auto-reading on Nurse pretty much removes the one counterplay that you have on her other than just hold forward and hope she doesn't catch up. You have to get behind stuff. You have to get behind line of sight, behind obstacles, behind walls, and good auto perks completely make this impossible against a even mediocre Nurse. This means that every auto perk in the game has to be balanced around Nurse, and so far we're not doing great. A perk such as Awakened Awareness, which is right now pretty mediocre, got nerfed in the PTB because this perk was actually a little bit too good on the nurse. You could hook a survivor, and because it lingered a little bit with Lethal Pursuer, then that's, by the way, going back to the previous problem that we talked about, perks with ripple effects, you could actually hook a survivor and then go immediately for someone in the vicinity, and it was really, really oppressive. So even though this was not really super OP on any other killer, on nurse, it was a problem, and thus the perk had to be nerfed. And now Awakened Awareness is a perk that, let's be honest, you're never going to see anyone run. Something very similar, it keeps happening every now and then when there's a new auto perk. The latest auto perk that we have as killer is called Wandering Eye. It's a really interesting perk. You start a chase with a survivor, and anyone that's injured nearby gets revealed. This would be, honestly, a pretty good effect, especially if the range was a little bit bigger. It's only 16 meters, I think. But again, you can't really buff this perk. Number one, the duration will be longer with Lethal Pursuer. And number two, if the range is too big, the nurse will literally use this perk to completely shut down teams and constantly see them through walls. Yeah, there's basically two solutions to this. Number one, introduce the idea that when survivors are seen by auras, sometimes or always, they are told about this. I think this would honestly help with the nurse, but in almost any other situation, I think it's bad. I think survivors don't need to be handheld more and be told that their aura is being shown, right? Unless it's some very, very specific perk that does this, right? But the easier one is just to make Nurse unable to see auras the moment she begins to charge her blink. Aura perks would still be useful for her to close the gap and find people, but much like Spirit, if she starts using her power, she just doesn't see you and she cannot cheese you with aura perks. This is something that they should have generally done yesterday. And honestly, if they want to go even further and nerf the Nurse even more, then I'm completely all for that. Even if you think that killers should be strong, if the top killer is a little bit weaker or the top few killers are a little bit weaker, that does enable other killers in general to get bigger buffs and the maps in general to be a little bit less safe, and that doesn't immediately break the game. It will probably make the game a bit more enjoyable for everyone across the board. So nerf the Nurse, pretty please, behavior, you'll do yourself a favor. Thank you. And we get to mistake number 10, the possible introduction of adaptive difficulty. This is something that behavior is not openly doing just yet, but I am seeing some hints that suggest that they might consider doing it in the future, and it's something that could be coming to our regular, normal Dead by Daylight. Let me explain what adaptive difficulty is. It's something that has existed in video games for many, many years. For example, I played a game not too long ago called Resident Evil 4, the remake, and this game has its difficulty settings. You can choose easy, normal, hard, the usual, but after you choose a difficulty, the game has a sub-difficulty meter that is hidden, kind of like the hidden MMR. It is something that happens in the background and you don't really know it's there. It's a hidden number that changes the more you are performing well in the game. If you're getting lots of headshots and killing lots of enemies, this number goes higher and higher, and it makes the game more difficult. But if you're losing a lot and you're dying quite often and you're running out of ammo and your knife durability is getting low, the game lowers this number in a few different ways and tries to help you out. You're missing ammo, it gives you a bit more ammo. You're missing knife charges, it maybe gives you a knife so that you can use it, right? The enemies will now take less damage. And this, for a single player game, is actually not a terrible idea. Millions of players of different skills and different proclivities play the game, and with this system, you ensure that the best players are not steamrolling through the game and making it super easy, and you also make sure that the less fortunate players don't get completely pummeled into the ground, so you kind of normalize the experience so that everyone has a slightly easier time not being on one extreme or another. But here's the problem. This, even though it works in a single player game for a first playthrough, it is quite annoying in a game that you expect to be precise. If you speedrun Resident Evil 4, or if you challenge run Resident Evil 4, you're gonna have situations where you shoot an enemy in the head 3 times with a Magnum and they die, but then in your next playthrough, you're gonna shoot them in the head 3 times with a Magnum and they won't die because you actually played a little bit better and now their health is higher or they're taking less damage. This makes it really difficult to know what the hell you are supposed to do. This little rubber banding, this moving the goalposts of what you need to do dynamically in a hidden way is pretty bad when you expect the game to be precise. Now, why am I talking about this and Resident Evil 4 when the subject of this video is Dead by Daylight? Is this happening in Dead by Daylight right now? Not yet in the one before. but yes in the 2v8. In the 2v8, we have a hidden modifier, we don't know the exact numbers, it doesn't really tell you in the game, that activates in the 2v8 mode only. Basically, if the killers are doing really well and they're getting lots of hooks, the game actually speeds up generators so that survivors actually have a chance to bounce back. This is very similar to what we talked about in Resident Evil. And the opposite is also true. If the generators are being done too quickly, but the killers don't have enough hooks yet, the game understands that the killers are struggling and the generators become slower by a small margin, right? And I think this is something that the developers could very well be planning to apply to the normal 1v4. In the PTB that we said was cancelled in the intro of this video, we had something where if a survivor dies, the rest of the team gets a little bit of help. We also had something where if you hook a survivor, you see other survivors that are far, but only if those other survivors have not been hooked. In other words, if they've been hooked equally or less, but if they've been hooked more, you don't see them. In other words, you kind of get punished as a killer if you're doing well, and as a survivor, you get a little bit of a break if you're not doing so good, right? And I don't like this. I don't like the idea of this. I don't like the idea that in the future of normal, regular 1 versus 4 Dead by Daylight, your gen speed might be modified constantly based on the amount of hooks the killer has. That your chase movement speed might be increased if you don't get enough downs. I think Dead by Daylight is already such a difficult game to understand. And there's something really beautiful that happens once you have a certain amount of hours and you really come to grips with the game. You become really good at running certain loops. Some survivors can run certain loops with their eyes closed pretty much. You're really, really good at mind game in some places and you know you're going to hit a hit here. You can see a gen and judging by the sound or even by the visual of the pistons, you can see like, okay, it's 30 seconds away from popping. I can actually get this hook, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of calculations that you do on the fly based on your experience that if you pull it off, feel great. But doing this sort of calculation on the fly is going to be very, very difficult if you don't know how the game works internally. If you look at a gen and you don't really know if it's going to be done in 30 seconds or 35 seconds or 25 seconds based on some hidden multipliers that are constantly changing in the background that you don't really know or understand, I think you're adding yet another muddy layer of complexity to a game that is already very, very complex. And that's it. That's the 10 issues that I wanted to talk about. These did not include anything super, super obvious, such as the cheating epidemic or accessibility issues. But if you think there's any topic that is not getting enough attention, that you think behavior is like slowly, possibly making a mistake on, I would love to see your comments and what you have to say about the subject. Thank you so much for watching.